Hey everyone, welcome to the Water Champions podcast, where we dive into the world of water reuse and efficiency solutions that are transforming the way we build and live. I'm your host, Paul Mann, and today we're speaking with Ben Welty, Senior Associate and Sustainability Manager at Feldman Architecture in San Francisco. Feldman Architecture has been at the forefront of integrating sustainable water strategies into high-end residential and commercial projects, creating beautiful spaces that work in harmony with their environment. Today, we'll explore how architects and developers can implement water reuse and efficiency solutions, from concept and design to permitting and implementation. Whether you're an architect looking to integrate more sustainable water systems or a developer wanting to future-proof your projects, this conversation, it's packed with insights that you won't want to miss. So let's jump in. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Paul. Glad to be here.
Great to have you. Well, to start, Ben, can you share a little bit about your background and what led you to focus on sustainability in architecture?
Yeah, it was all by accident. It wasn't intentional at first. I grew up in South Carolina, just playing in the creeks and woods around there. So that gave me an appreciation for the natural environment. I decided at a young age I wanted to be an architect, but I hadn't put two and two together. I started my undergraduate school in 2000. So at that point, sustainability wasn't really a big topic in architecture, and I didn't get much exposure to that at all during my undergraduate degree. But when I went to get my graduate degree in 2008, it was starting to become a thing, right? People were talking about in school, you had some classes on it. And I did a design build program where the building that we designed and built was a LEED Platinum project, as well as built a passive house standard. So that's how I got exposure to applying sustainable design to architecture. And then when I moved out to San Francisco and started at Feldman Architecture in 2013, I had expressed an interest in sustainability. And then within a year of me starting there, the person who led that committee left. So they turned to me and asked, "Hey, do you want to do it?" And I was like, sure. Little did I know how much I didn't know and how much I had to learn. So it's been, 12 years now? And yeah, still a lot to learn.
So cool. I love that story. How did sustainability become a core principle at Feldman Architecture? Was there like a defining moment or project that shifted the firm's approach?
It was really Jonathan Feldman, founder of the firm. He had always had that as one of his ethics in architecture and one of his interests. So he began when he started the firm, I believe, back in 2003. It was sustainable design was there from the onset, and he hoped to get it in as part of every single project and somehow influence the design. He was fortunate. One of his first projects was actually a house for his parents. And so he got to apply a lot of sustainable design strategies, green roofs, and other methods that were common back in the mid 2000s. And from there, it just germinated as the firm grew bigger. It became part of our way of operating, part of our mindset, and just part of what we do. Now, over the years, what sustainability has meant in architecture has changed. So we've had to shift our focus as well and keep learning and become more familiar with new technologies, especially surrounding water reuse. But it's always been there since the beginning of the firm.
Wow. What an innovator. That's great. How have you seen the conversation around water efficiency evolve in architecture over the past decade or so that you've been at Feldman Architecture?
Sure, it's interesting. Practicing in California, it's a much different landscape than a lot of other places in the country. We have long periods of drought, and then we have periods where we're getting plenty of rain through the winter. So when you hit those drought moments, that's when the topic really comes to the forefront. And a lot of times along with droughts come wildfire threats. And so in the I would say 20 teens, so around 2017 or so, we were in a prolonged drought. We had some pretty big wildfires, and water conservation and availability came more to the forefront and part of the conversation a little bit more. So that's also about the time where we were shifting our sustainability focus to evolve and keep up with the industry. So for the most part, it was effects of global climate change and natural disaster driven.
Interesting. Have you seen any other drivers that motivate clients to want water reuse and efficiency solutions? Maybe it's sustainability or cost savings or regulatory requirements, maybe a combination of all of that?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of everything. Again, being out here in California, facing the threats that we do, it is on our clients' mind. And when something like a wildfire hits and takes out entire communities, people are much more attuned to that threat and the things that they can do to mitigate that. So a lot of our clients come to us with a desire to implement these strategies and with an awareness of those threats. And I would say also, just in general, climate change is becoming more and more part of the broader societal conversation. Politics aside, I think close to 75% of people in this country alone believe in climate change or think that the climate is changing and having huge effects on our lives in the built environment. People understand the threats of this, and I think that's one of the biggest factors for people coming around to this. Cost savings, especially around gray water, is definitely another aspect of that. And again, out here in California, a lot of our jurisdictions are now requiring at least prepping for gray water in new homes. And that bar can be set even higher for commercial buildings, office buildings, and government buildings.
Sure. So I'm curious, is the conversation about water sustainability originating from the client, or is that something where maybe you as the architect and your firm are driving that conversation and educating the client?
I would say about half the time it comes with the client, but 100% of the time it's part of our narrative that we're bringing it up and talking about it with clients. It's part of our entire sustainable design approach to architecture and home design.
Interesting. So when you say a narrative, you're really telling a story, maybe about sustainability as you present a new design to someone.
And even before that, we broadcast on our website our sustainability goals, our processes. So when people come to work with us, they know where we stand on those things. But we also like to have the conversation about sustainable design, including water conservation and reuse, before the design starts. So we set the expectations with the project, our client programming questionnaire, ask them questions about this. And this all happens before we even put pen to paper.
Yeah, interesting. So how do you go about educating clients, whether it's the homeowners or the contractors, about the benefits of water reuse without overwhelming them with all those technical details that come with it?
The first, there's the need, the why of it. And that's easier to speak to. Again, you're pulling on people's heartstrings by identifying the threats. And we're not trying to oversell it. It doesn't always make sense to implement these strategies in our homes. And we're not trying to force these upon clients just to put a plaque on our wall, right? We're only doing it when it makes sense. And as we start with the conversation of their interest in it, how appropriate we think it is for the project. And then from there, if it seems to have legs, then we go the next step and we start discussing it with the landscape architect to get their expertise and input, or consultants such as yourselves who can really provide a much higher level of information and detail to what we'd be proposing.
Interesting. Yeah, let's talk about overcoming resistance, whether you're working with a contractor or a developer or others who are involved in this project. Some of them may hesitate to integrate water reuse due to their perceived complexity or cost involved. So, what arguments have been most effective in changing their minds?
Again, it's pulling on their heartstrings by pointing out the real threats that we face and that their home may face. But really, the first thing is you want to listen to them and hear what their hesitations are, what their past experiences are, and why they may be against or not eager to implement something like this. Because I feel like we're still very early on in this technology, even though it's been around for 10, 15, 20 years or whatever. But because we're so near the beginning of it, people still have fresh in their minds all of the complications and the things that have gone wrong that you have with anything that's being beta tested or in the early stages of its development. And so those are still very real for people. So we like to hear them out first and see what their experience has been. And then we can follow up, address those, and explain to them what new systems are available, how things may have changed, where the industry it's going itself, where municipalities are going, what's going to be required, and the smart things to do to future proof your home.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting you talk about beta testing or something being new. So many of these products actually are not new. They're just new to the United States, but
Right.
they've been used for years in Australia or Israel or the Netherlands or areas where they've gone through drought, the Middle East, and they've had a chance to develop technology and perfect it, whatever degree it's at, that it's not new, but I can imagine it is scary to people here as you're talking to them because they've never heard of this stuff.
And that's one aspect of it, right? Is the technology proven? And so once you get past that hurdle, showing them that it is, it's now the contractors, the subcontractors, and the installers. Do they know what they're doing when it comes to these systems? So that's the other thing that we have to get past is really finding people to work with who are comfortable using these systems, who are adept at these technologies, so they can make the client and us, to be honest, feel comfortable using them.
Yeah. I've personally come up against folks who they've always done it a certain way and they don't want to learn new stuff. Their job is they know how to do it. They're not interested in taking on new things that they have to learn and maybe cut their teeth on. So sometimes it can be a big obstacle to work with people like that,
Yeah, and that's very common as we all get older to develop that mindset about things.
for sure. Let's talk a little bit about when you're working with clients, how do you assess whether a water reuse system is viable for their site and their project goals?
So we begin every project by doing a thorough site analysis. So the hydrological aspects of the site. We also pull weather data going back from how many ever previous years so we can get the rainfall data. And even that is not 100% perfect because as the climate is changing, so are the weather patterns. So in a few spots where we have multiple projects in a certain location, we might put out our own weather station and start gathering data. But that background info is really the biggest thing as a starting point. So you have that information going in so you can make an informed decision. From that point, we talk about their goals and their desires for what they want to see in their project, how much water conservation, water reuse means to them, their occupancy habits, how many days out of the year are they going to be in the house, or is this a vacation home? Is this their full-time residence? Because that can affect the system or the strategies that we implement. And then from there, it's really talking to the experts. We're not the experts in a lot of the sustainable design stuff that we try to champion ourselves, but that's where having really good, knowledgeable partners, such as our design consultants and contractors, comes in handy because we want to get their professional opinion on what's best for this project or what's best for this site and any issues they run up against in the past against things that we're proposing.
Yeah, that's great. Bringing in best of breed people is a great strategy, especially as it's so early. As we said, for some of these
Right.
solutions, you need those specialists. That's great. So, what cost implications should architects and developers be aware of when integrating water reuse systems? How do you balance sustainability with budget constraints?
Yeah, cost is always a big issue. Generally, if not done intentionally, the cost consideration is not thought about from very early on in the process when you're proposing these ideas. Those sustainable design features would be the first things that get value engineered when it comes to it in pricing. So for us, it's getting the background information and building a database of how much these systems cost, how much the components cost, how much it costs to build a water tank, how much it costs for pumps, how much it costs for this consultant. So we try to build a database of that so we can at least put numbers to these things so we can consider those in the overall construction budget from the get-go. So we're not putting anything in or proposing anything that is ultimately going to get later and in the end will have wasted all of our times. So that's the first thing. Another thing we want people to know is while there is a return on investments with greywater, capturing rainwater in our experience and rainwater reuse does not really have much of a return on investment, just due to the fact that water, at least here in California, again, is so heavily subsidized and the cost is cheap. But you do get benefits from greywater. On the other side of it, while you may have savings there, if you have intensive systems, a lot of pumping, your electrical use might go up. So there is a balance there, not to say you won't eventually get a return on the investment. What you may gain in water reuse may just prolong a little bit your return on investment in your PV systems and battery storage and stuff like that. But overall, we can still make a pretty good argument for the case of implementing it is just being aware of what these things are going to cost.
Sure. It's interesting what you said about some of these projects run over and something like a water reuse system might get cut out of the project. I've seen that time and time again with especially new development because the construction never goes as planned, the materials cost more, the delays in putting everything together. And yeah, this is one of the first things that they'll cut. So it's almost like when someone gives you a number, you have to double it
Yeah.
if they're doing construction for you, and then say, okay, can we still fit that water reuse system in their worst case scenario? It's really interesting.
And again, being educated yourself about how much stuff actually costs. We found ourselves for a lot of different aspects of sustainable design in the early going. We'd put numbers to stuff, but then when it got down to really crunching the numbers, there were so many things that we missed that really add up to a lot more than you anticipated. Again, it's having that information early on, informing your clients and setting expectations for what that cost is going to be so you don't get surprised with it down the road.
Sure. And then, of course, there's worst case scenarios. You talk about rainwater harvesting not having the best return on investment. A few years ago, we had a drought here in Northern California. You can only water, I think it was once a week. And if you have some water thirsty plants and you've got a big landscape, that's a huge liability financially
Right.
if they lose that landscape. All of a sudden, if you have rainwater harvesting, you can water as much as you want. Sometimes it makes perfect sense if you look at the cost and value of a landscape and losing that, or not being able to top up your pool, just something like that. That's all about enjoying your property, having a good time in life. Sometimes it just makes good sense from a personal standpoint.
Not angering your neighbors when you're in a drought and they drive by and give you an eye because you're watering your lawn. That's
Absolutely.
invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wildfires, especially here, a huge concern for us. A lot of these strategies and techniques and water storage can increase the wildfire resilience of a home. Having water on site in a tank that firefighters can tap into should the lines go out for their hoses. We do that with our tanks, our tools. So having that extra water reservoir on site is certainly a benefit. And then also, as you mentioned earlier, just keeping your landscape lush, right? A dry, dead landscape is much more likely to catch on fire than one that is healthy and irrigated. So that's a big one there that I think really makes our home safer as far as wildfire resistance is concerned.
Absolutely. And also, what we're finding is contouring the land with regards to stormwater to slow spread and sink it.
Right.
Keep it on site and let that water sink in. And that's a great fire retardant when the soil is enriched with water. And it obviously also provides water for months after the rains for these plants. So it
Right.
reduces water need for irrigation.
And then as another effect of that, just biohabitats, right? Even thriving biohabitats. So there's all sorts of different benefits for keeping that water on site.
So, Ben, what are some of the common misconceptions architects and developers have about water reuse systems? What would you say to the skeptics?
I think, like you mentioned earlier, that a lot of this technology is not new. It's been proven, it's been used before successfully in areas that commonly experience drought. It's like the same way that we talk about transitioning to heat pump water heaters and HVAC systems. We get a lot of pushback from contractors and subcontractors because they're not used to these systems, but the heat pump has been around forever. Your refrigerator is a heat pump, right? So the fact that a lot of these technologies are proven just because you haven't seen them necessarily around where you live or have experience with them previously doesn't mean that there aren't proven solutions out there that are effective. And the other thing that I would say is, especially now, there are more and more people who know what they're doing. There are really great water consultants available out there and subcontractors who do know how to install these systems. So I think the barrier to entry is not nearly as difficult as it has been maybe 10 years ago.
Sure. What I found is just getting people emotionally involved in the benefits as well. Obviously, it's saving the planet, helping your community, but we also like to show them how much water they're going to save over 25 years, how much money they're going to save over that time frame, and what the reduction in carbon impact will be, as well as the ROI break even point. Once we get people on those numbers and they can see the benefit and change they're going to make, they get behind it. Certainly the homeowners do. And then once they want it, they can tell the contractors what they want.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's interesting. Have you ever faced resistance due to the visual impact of water tanks or other system components? And if so, how do you balance aesthetics with functionality?
That's part of what the architect and landscape architect's job is, right? There's a lot of things that go into our houses that don't look good, that we may look better in any number of ways. But also, I would say embrace it. Embrace seeing the technologies. The same thing with solar panels. For so long, everybody talked about how hideous it was seeing them on the roof. But I think it's great to outwardly exhibit this technology so people can see what you're doing and that people are using these systems. It can be used as a learning mechanism for a lot of people. Jonathan, for instance, with his system in his house, he has a sign out front that says this landscape is irrigated with greywater. And that has people stopping by and asking him, how do you do that? I think really broadcasting these technologies and that you are using these systems is great. Now, yes, you don't want them to look terrible. Aesthetics are a big thing, and that comes with budget implications. One of the lessons that we learned, one of our original houses that had water tanks, we had aesthetic concerns. So we did the 3 tanks in board form concrete so the aesthetics matched the house. Now that came at a huge body carbon impact because of the concrete, and then also a huge cost factor. So the next project we did it on, we scaled it down. We used traditional tanks, but then we used the thin corrugated metal to cover them. And then again, it went nicely with the aesthetics of the rest of the house, but you still see the tanks. They're still there and they're still visible.
Yeah, I love that. You can really dress these things up. You can hide them. You can plant around them. And yeah, if you have the budget, you can pour something nicer in concrete or even just go below ground,
Right.
which if you're building a new home, that's a perfect time to do it when you have all your heavy machinery in there digging foundation. Just dig another hole and put a cistern below ground. And I also love the way you talk about creating a new paradigm for how we look at these systems. And let's turn that into something we're proud of as an aesthetic
Right.
in the home. So it is something that in areas like Texas, for example, many of them have rainwater harvesting tanks. It's a norm, or just north of me in Sonoma County, everybody seems to have them in more of the rural area. So it just becomes something people get more used to, it seems, with time. So how do water reuse and efficiency solutions enhance the marketability of the homes you're building, whether through positive PR or LEED certification points, or just appealing to sustainability minded upscale buyers?
Sure. As far as our firm is concerned, it really shows that we're standing behind the words we're speaking about having a strong sustainable design mindset and being really committed to it. Again, we don't want to be just spending the client's money just to spend it for our own marketing material. We're only doing it in cases where it made sense. But I think it shows for us as a firm that we're trying to push the boundaries on what is typical for single family residential. And that we also do have some level of expertise and knowledge that ultimately does make us more marketable for folks specifically looking for architects who are experienced with sustainable design.
Yeah, interesting. Is there a certain demographic profile that you're finding are interested in the types of designs that your firm produces?
Being based in California, it's a lot of California folks. So the conversation with them tends to be a lot easier than maybe clients from other parts of the country. So we do have it easier in that sense and certainly acknowledge that. But I would say there's no specific demographic. I think everybody across the board, our younger clients or our older clients, everybody's concerned about the same things. We all live in the same environment out here and live through the same threats. We've seen what's gone on with the climate since the Industrial Revolution. So we're all experiencing the same thing. And so it's pretty standard across the board. Even like we may have our own biases sometimes thinking our older clients aren't going to be interested in these things. And that's turned out to be completely false. Their kids influence them.
Sure.
I guess lastly, you mentioned lead certifications. So LEED, Living Building Challenge, any of these certification programs is going to be a big section where you can achieve a lot of points for water. There'll be certain prerequisites that you have to hit. And then the other points out there just help you get to that next level, whether it's silver, gold, or the platinum. And then for Living Building Challenge, to get the water pedal itself, that's one of the 7 pedals and a big part of it.
Fantastic. Well, let's shift now, Ben. You guys have done some great installations, and I'd love to just talk about these and get some insights from your experience of going through them. So let's talk a little bit about Spring Ranch. I'm just curious, what was behind the design motivation for Spring Ranch with regards to water reuse and efficiency?
So the site that this house is built on is a 500-acre organic farm with livestock grazing. So when the clients approached us, site sensitivity was a big part of the design and incorporating sustainable design strategies. They have walnut, olive, and grape groves, and so need obviously irrigation for that. So it's a gravity fed system. And I think the way that it really influenced the aesthetics of the design itself is the cascading roofs and how the water moves from the upper roof down to the lower roofs and then into the system itself. It goes from the highest part of capture and again, just gravity flows down into the tanks, storing approximately 28,000, 29,000 gallons of rainwater. It's particularly helpful for newly planted areas during the dry season. It helped us establish the landscape there a lot more quickly and then also keeps it more lush throughout the year.
Absolutely. And so, what were the main benefits of this passive approach where everything was gravity fed?
So not as much reliance on pumps and so less equipment, less costs there. Strategically placed was a dedicated vegetable and flower garden right next to the tank, so we didn't have to move the water that far. And again, also it's just how the approach is expressed in the design itself. I love it when a design takes on the characteristics of the things that you talk about in the background or how it performs, how it subtly does that. So you wouldn't notice it necessarily by looking at it, maybe unless you were out there when it was raining, but just seeing how the design comes together and understanding how it was shaped to really promote this water catchment and storage.
That's fantastic. And the system doubles as a fire defense mechanism. How can architects and developers integrate water storage into fire prone landscapes without compromising aesthetics?
Again, embrace it. We had these tanks stored above ground. We try to do that as much as possible so we're not excavating any more than we need to. And then it's simply, like I said, this corrugated metal scrim surrounding the tanks that was relatively inexpensive. That blends in nicely with the rest of the design. It takes on more of that ranch aesthetics. Everything fits in quite beautifully. So it just takes, I think, a little thought put into it, and you don't have to spend a lot of money to really make it work.
Yeah, that's great. And you really used rainwater in a way that's both artistic and functional. Curious how you feel architects can incorporate water features that enhance design rather than feeling like it's an afterthought.
Start incorporating it from the beginning of the design. Don't get to start construction documents and then throw 3 water tanks on the site plan. You got to start thinking about it and having the conversation with the clients, with your consultants, with your contractor from the beginning.
Yeah, makes sense. And the project seems to focus on native species to reduce irrigation need in terms of plants. How can developers use landscaping as a long-term water conservation strategy?
Yeah, and I think this is something that is more and more common nowadays is using native or at least drought tolerant species, landscapes that use as little water as possible or the amount of water that's appropriate for their site. Again, this
Mhm.
is going to help with fire resistance. It's going to help, I think, just with human happiness, right? Having that lush landscape to look at instead of dead non-native species because there's not enough water in the ecosystem to support it.
Makes sense. Let's talk about the farm. Can you tell us a little bit about what was behind the design motivation for water reuse in this installation?
Sure. So this was Jonathan Feldman's house, his own house. So it was a good kind of testing ground for a larger scale greywater and rainwater catchment system that even though built, I think completed about 10 years ago, maybe more to this day, we're still using data. So we've had a good amount of time to get some lessons learned, see what works, see what doesn't. make adjustments to the system, use the data to see what you're actually getting out of it. So that's been great. He has both the rainwater and gray water harvesting, collection, and storage, about 1,100 gallons of rainwater and 250 gallons of gray water. I think one of the biggest things that we've learned from this one is the maintenance and how much it actually takes to maintain these systems. It is important that the client is knowledgeable about how to maintain these systems, or at least has somebody on call that can service these.
Great point.
Because again, they are somewhat complex. And this being earlier on, kind of in the technology, there are changes that you need to make a lot of the way. So it's been a good test lab for us and helps us talk to clients more easily with direct experience with installing the systems.
Now, as I understand it, the farm was one of the first San Francisco projects to integrate gray water and rainwater for both irrigation and toilet flushing. So I'm curious, what were the biggest challenges in getting city approvals for the system?
Finding somebody that would say yes.
Right.
And they were talking about now it is a challenge still for most municipalities that have not adopted this technology yet, whether it be gray water reuse, black water treatment, or even rainwater collection. Codes are always a hurdle. So it takes a lot of patience and diligence. You really have to want to make it work and need to find the right people to talk to and come informed with what you're proposing. Eventually, we got there, and once the first domino falls on something like that, opens the door for so many other folks to begin installing these things on their home. But yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons learned for us, just the amount of time it takes and the hesitancy that municipalities can have to unknowns like this, especially when it comes to something that can affect human health.
Sure. No, I think you make a great point. You need to know your code. And maybe that's why working with consultants who specialize in it can really help, because I find if you can walk in for a permit and you can quote code, you'll get less resistance than if you don't know what you're talking about. They'll likely push it back on you. Yeah.
Or have an expert with you that can talk
Exactly.
intelligently do it.
Exactly. I'm curious, you talked about monitoring and optimization. I think you use a monitoring tool, HoboLink, for water tracking. How essential do you feel real-time data is for maintaining efficient water systems?
I think it's absolutely essential. So with HoboLink, he tracks the water levels, the demand of the house, usage across the irrigation, toilet usage, and then how much he's actually using from municipal sources. You want to monitor just to make sure the system's working like it's predicted. And if you see any anomalies, that you can go in there and troubleshoot to fix it. And it's not just with water, it's really with any systems, with your PV systems, right? You want to monitor the output of that just to make sure that you're maximizing its capability and there's no issues in the system itself. So I think it's hugely important to monitor.
Sure. And I find for the clients, knowledge is power. When they start to see how they're using water, how they're saving water, when they should take certain actions like take a shower or flush a toilet, it really becomes empowering for them. It becomes fun and exciting to see them game that system of water efficiency.
Yeah, it can change your habits, or it
Yeah,
can make a stronger argument to get your teenager to not take 30-minute showers.
yeah, absolutely. That was a super exciting project. Let's talk about another project. Let's talk about Urban Oasis. Can you tell us a little bit about this project? And again, how did they reuse water and make it more efficient?
So again, this was a client that was really bought in to sustainable design. And so this one's a really fun one because it was a new approach for us, somewhat pioneering, at least as far as single family residential is concerned. And we use a blue roof system, which is a system where your roof actually takes stormwater and holds it on site. So it doesn't have to release it into the stormwater system, which just on its own, it's always best to manage your stormwater on site, especially in densely built urban areas. It can help prevent flooding. But then that water is filtered through the roof through different layers of filtration. So in this project, the blue roof holds the water temporarily and it filters through different layers of filtration within the roof and then is then used within the landscape itself, effectively reducing the runoff and increasing the water reusability. So this water is used actually multiple times. And in this case, it's a steeply sloped site. So the water goes from the roof, it's filtered down to the lowest portion of the site, and then pumped back up to the blue roof again for additional filtration. So it's a closed system and you're using that water in multiple cycles.
That is so cool. And it is very innovative. You see very few people using blue or blue-green roofs these days. And I do see it has a huge benefit, including when you're planting things on the roof, that is reducing the impact of the sun reflecting off of these black rooftops, for example. And of course, plants take in carbon and sequester it, and they do all kinds of great
Yeah.
things for photosynthesis. So there's so many benefits of this type of a design.
Yeah. It creates pollinator habitats.
That's right. We need more butterflies and bees and hummingbirds and all that good stuff. Okay, let's jump to the last project you guys did. Talk about that design and again, what were the influences?
So this project itself is unique in that it's within a larger community called the Santa Lucia Preserve, which is a nature preserve. Very few home lots by percentage are available in this community. And the funds and proceeds from building those homes and the yearly dues go to protecting the rest of the nature preserve itself. So it's a beautiful area. You can barely see your neighbor. It's filled with wildlife. This was a really inspiring site, really inspiring clients for us, and they wanted to take the leap with us to try our first Living Building Challenge project. And as we always are, and being extremely, it's not sometimes overly ambitious, and we were going for the full certification, and water is a big part of that. And that was one of the main things we were concerned about from the get go, just knowing how much water our typical houses use, how much water rainfall we actually get in California. We knew it was always going to be a struggle. Ultimately, we're not going to end up going down that path for full certification, but we've learned a lot in the process. And the Santa Lucia Preserve community itself is a closed loop water system. All the water that they provide to the residents is collected and filtered and then re released. So, this project is actually one of the more innovative in our project portfolio as far as sustainable design is concerned, as the clients came to us with very ambitious goals and actually came aboard with us for going after our first Living Building Challenge certified project. So, we're going through that process. And at the beginning, our goal was let's go big and try to get full Living Building Challenge certification. And obviously, the water pedal is one of the hardest ones to achieve, at least for us in California. So we knew that was always going to be a struggle. And so we dove into this, we crunched the numbers, and it just didn't really seem to pencil out for us to be complete net zero water for this project just because of the rainfall limitations that this site gets and how much rainfall we actually get in California and our ability to collect it and it be sufficient to meet all the domestic water needs. But we learned a lot along the way here. And this community that it's in is actually a closed loop water system. All the water for this particular community that's provided to the homes there is collected and filtered on site, used by the houses, returned to the system, filtered again, and then released. So we felt good about the water story there, but that didn't stop us from continuing to push things as far as we could. There's an extensive rainwater system that captures runoff from both the buildings and the hardscape areas, which supports toilet flushing, laundry, and it significantly cuts down on the municipal water use. It's also a greywater system. The recycled greywater helps reduce the load on sewer systems and also generates water for the landscape. So the combined two, the rainwater and greywater systems, meet 100% of the project's irrigation needs. So we at least did achieve that. Again, we're not net zero water completely as far as the building use, but the process itself, even I find when you fail maybe at certain things, there's still a lot to be learned. I always like to say there's success and failure. And I think we found that here because we learned a lot of methods and different things that we didn't know about water use, capture, and collection and reuse than we did before. So again, I think the fact that we tried and pushed the boundary, that's only going to make our next project stronger.
Sure. If I remember correctly, the cost of water for these people is very low because of their closed loop system that they already have in place. I would assume when you say it had to pencil out, I'm sure a lot of it was just them wanting to be more eco-conscious and sustainable. And that sustainability stories maybe drove the narrative more than the cost savings.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the clients just wanted to do the right thing with this house. They wanted to push the boundary and be as sustainable as they could.
Sure. And then was there municipal water as a backup on this project?
Yes, for all potable water needs.
Yes. And so I'm curious, like, how did you balance the potable water or municipal water with the on-site water? What lessons can developers learn from this model in terms of how much water you want to use from your municipal supplier versus how much do you want to try to capture and reuse or recycle on site? What lessons can developers learn from this model to understand when it's right to bring in water reuse and when it's best to just use water that's coming from your municipal provider or from a well or whatever else you have supplying water already?
Yeah, I think when at all possible and it makes sense that you try to use as much water that you can capture on site as responsible. Again, every situation is different. And also, it has to be allowed by your municipality, right? But using the water that naturally falls on the site, reusing it, managing it, and keeping it on site, I think to me makes the most sense than before you tap into a municipal source. Now, you always need to have that municipal backup. And for potable water uses, we're still not in a place where black water can be treated commonly or is permitted to be treated in a lot of jurisdictions you'll probably find yourself in. I mean, that's the case here. But I think for the most part, when it makes sense, we do try to lean more on rainwater capture before we tap into municipal sources.
Sure. And the statistic is 20% of all energy used is for pumping and treating water in central treatment centers. So there is a strong case in terms of sustainability for exactly what you just said.
Right.
Capture and reuse whatever you can on your property first, and then use backup as municipal or well as needed. Yeah, great. All right. Those were some wonderful installations you did, and thanks for sharing that with us. I'd like to move forward now. So, Ben, what have you guys learned from monitoring these water reuse systems over time? Have there been any unexpected performance challenges or necessary adjustments you've had to make?
There's definitely been some troubleshooting, and I mentioned testing different filtration methods earlier. Actually, from our handful of clients that we've had these systems installed on, we haven't gotten a lot of negative feedback or had to troubleshoot a lot of issues. Now, they may not tell us about everything, but we do try to keep in touch and do post occupancy evaluations to make sure the systems are running properly.
Sure.
But the maintenance and upkeep, like taking care of a car and changing its oil properly, you need to do the same thing with these systems.
Yeah, that's interesting. How much ongoing maintenance do these systems require? And what advice would you give to clients to ensure long-term functionality?
So I would say on average, the maintenance is quarterly. The workload can vary from quarter to quarter, but they do take some maintenance. But again, that's like your car. It's just something that needs to be taken care of to keep running well. And also so you can identify if there are any problems in the system so you can head off these things becoming any worse. You need to know what you're doing or have somebody who does to help maintain the system. I would encourage all clients to, when they have these systems installed, educate themselves about it. Your contractor or subcontractor should provide you with an operations and maintenance manual. You should ask to be walked through how the systems work, what to look for, just so you know what you're looking at yourself and dealing with, because you're really the first person that's probably going to realize when something's wrong. But you're also the one that is most available to be hands on to keep the system running smoothly.
Yeah. And thankfully, there's been an evolution. A lot of these systems now are smart systems in that they can be monitored through a smartphone and you can get alerts when something's not right as long as sensors are set up. The homeowner can know, the installer or contractor can know, and really jump on it rather than letting it sit for a whole season and realizing it never worked. Looking back, Ben, are there any water reuse strategies that you found to be less effective or more complex than you expected? And what would you do differently today?
I would say always err on the side of less complexity, especially if you're new to these systems. Go for the easy stuff. Don't try to create necessarily a perfect system. Go for the things that you know is going to provide you the greatest benefits, right? And they're going to work at the scale of which you're going to use them. If you try to create a perfect system, you're always going to be tinkering everything, may not work, may not get there, but you need to put your money where it's going to be most valuable, is what I would suggest. And then understand your system, monitor, understand the capacity and your need, and then have it set up to plan for expansion. So once you do have the simple system up and going and working, then you can decide whether or not you want to add components onto that or expand it in any way.
Wonderful. We've been talking a lot about residential homes primarily. How do you feel these water strategies can be applied at scale, particularly in like multi-unit developments or commercial projects?
I think we're already seeing it happen. A lot of municipalities here are actually requiring these gray water systems in the city of San Francisco and a lot of the communities around here. I would think it might almost be easier because you're still dealing with one centralized set of equipment. Let's say you're doing a multi-family building, and then you just have the infrastructure of the pipework and everything. So you can serve more units in that way.
That's a really great point. And we are starting to see some big commercial projects. For example, Uber headquarters in San Francisco is recycling all of their gray water from their bathroom sinks and using it for flushing toilets. The Google Visitor Experience down in Mountain View just opened this past year, and they are collecting rainwater off their really cool roof. Really beautiful design, and they're capturing 600,000 gallons of rainwater below their structure. It's basically the size of an Olympic pool. They also recycle all of their gray water on site. They have solar, they have wind turbines. They actually make more water than they're using. So they're net positive in their water production, which is really fantastic to see these things happening.
And those things help change public perception because not only do you need the regulators, you need the user to feel safe using reused water for these needs. So there's still a public perception issue, and a lot of these big installations really do help that cause. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier, showcasing these systems and making them public so it educates people is hugely
That's right.
beneficial.
Absolutely. More stories of success are helpful. You talked about policy just now, or regulators. Are there any upcoming regulations that architects and developers should be aware of regarding water reuse and efficiency?
I would say for us, we're finding more and more municipalities are starting to build it into their local codes that your building or house needs to be gray water ready. So that's all the more reason for architects specifically to get out ahead of these things. So you're not waiting until January 1st when that thing goes into effect and then having to run it, right? You're already up to speed on what you're going to need to be designing in and implementing and accounting for as far as the cost is concerned in your homes. So these codes are always changing and they're always pushing the boundaries as far as sustainability is concerned. And again, this is going to change depending on where you live. Our drought conditions, maybe for you, you have too much water or you have contaminated water. Yeah, for us, what we're seeing in California is now more and more municipalities are starting to require you to at least be gray water ready in your commercial building or home. So, as an architect, it behooves you to educate yourselves and be ready for this policy change. So, when January 1st hits and that policy goes into effect, you're not trying to catch up and learn what you should probably already know, right? For these systems, you're going to have to be designing and you're going to be accounting for in the budget. You got to be educating your clients about. So policies are ever changing. They're pushing in a more sustainable direction. Again, it depends on where you live. You might be faced with different issues, obviously, than we are here. Our drought may be you have too much water, it's flooding too much. That could lead to water contamination. Any sorts of things can make it into policy. So just look and see what your jurisdictions, regional jurisdictions have coming down the pipe and be prepared for it.
In some cases, they may accelerate faster in certain regions than others. We're seeing with the flooding, salt water is now coming into and contaminating the freshwater resources that people are using for drinking. So that in some areas, they're going to have to make some big changes that they really didn't see coming. What strategies, Ben, have you found most effective when working with city officials to gain approvals for water reuse systems?
Like I said earlier, just do your homework when you go in and have all your ducks in a row. They're not going to be the ones that are going to be doing the research for you. A lot of times they're not going to have knowledge of what you're proposing. So you need to go in there with the background information, the proof of concept, or your consultants to help influence and change their minds and persuade them because that's what it's going to take. And again, be patient. It's going to take time.
And it's almost like you have to be a lawyer. You have to present case law of other projects that have been done similarly in the area, and maybe even some metrics sometimes will help to show how those projects were successful to give people ease in approving these projects, because nobody wants to be first to stick their neck out and give an approval. But if you can show that others have done this in the past and it was actually very successful, that is changing the paradigm. They
Yeah.
want to be part of this success story. So you want to get them to see how they can help to pioneer a water smart future and gain the PR value of that, or at least the satisfaction that they were part of that solution rather than a stop in that process.
And if whatever you're trying to go for is not currently permitted where you are, do your research and look at areas where it is and get information from those websites. Talk to the officials there and get their input and then bring that to the table.
Great point. Are there any financial incentives available to encourage architects and developers to integrate these systems? And how much impact do these incentives have on adoption rates?
Yeah, as far as incentives and rebates, those things are always changing. And I don't have a lot of good background information on that right now. I would say the biggest thing for us, though, and this is pretty creative, is you could lower your water bill. All the times that you might be with a greywater system reusing this water, your water bill is probably going to have a pretty big sewage component on there. And we found success in actually lobbying the water utility with the data from your monitoring systems showing, hey, this is how little water or how less frequently we're actually putting water back into your sewage system because we're reusing water multiple times. And we've had utility companies provide discounts on sewage rates.
Fantastic. That's great. Very innovative. Ben, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation. Thank you for sharing your expertise on how water reuse and efficiency solutions are shaping the future of architecture and development. For those listening, if you're interested in learning more about water smart design and how to implement these strategies in your own projects, stay tuned for future episodes of the Water Champions podcast. Also, keep an eye out for an upcoming online course where we'll dive even deeper into practical solutions for architects and developers looking to integrate water efficiency into their work. So, Ben, where can our audience follow you to learn more about Feldman Architecture's work?
Sure, you can go to feldmanarchitecture.com. I'm Ben Welty on LinkedIn or Feldman Architecture on LinkedIn, and then also at Feldman Architecture on Instagram.
Great. Thanks again, Ben. And to our listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others in the industry who might find this valuable. Until next time, keep innovating and championing sustainable water solutions. Thank you. Hey, thanks for watching. Our water future depends on action, and we all need to be water champions. Visit waterchampions.com to explore cutting-edge water reuse and efficiency solutions for your home or business. Learn how you can implement these solutions through online courses available at renovaacademy.com. And please drop your comments below, like, share, and subscribe to help spread the word. Thank you.